Hi, this is Angela from Cooley Environmental Safety Training. This is a follow-up to our to test or not to test presentation we did last month. If you've not seen that presentation, please check it out on our web page in the white paper section or on our YouTube channel or Facebook page. As promised, we are putting out more information about designating hazardous and dangerous waste, and today we're going to focus on designating characteristic waste. A printed version of this presentation is also available on our webpage in the white paper section as well. And if you have any questions about waste designation or you need any training on dangerous waste management or hazardous waste management, please check out our webpage for our training dates. And as always, thank you for your time.
Waste designation is a step-by-step process by which a generator determines if they have generated a waste and if that waste will need to be managed as a hazardous or dangerous waste or simply as a solid waste. This information is critical in determining how waste produced either during and or after a manufacturing process will be handled by the generator. Proper waste designation allows generators to apply the correct waste codes on shipping manifests and annual reports. Waste designation is also used to determine a business's regulatory status and responsibilities. In the interest of keeping these presentations brief but still informative, the waste designation process will be covered in 4 segments. The first is this one, designating characteristic waste. Second, designating federally listed waste. Third, designating Washington State dangerous waste using the book designation method. And fourth, designating Washington State dangerous waste using the bioassay designation method. The hazardous waste identification process is the crucial first step in generators' hazardous waste management plan. Correctly determining whether a waste meets the federal or state definition of a hazardous or dangerous waste is essential to the waste management process. The waste generator is legally responsible for determining if a waste is a federal hazardous waste or a state-only dangerous waste. Under the 2016 changes to the federal hazardous waste rules, generators must keep documentation of how or why a solid waste was determined to be a hazardous waste, was determined not to be a hazardous waste. The scope of this provision focuses only on those solid wastes that could be a hazardous waste. So that would be spent materials, sludges, byproducts, and discarded commercial chemical products. Those types of materials have the potential to be either a listed or a characteristically hazardous waste. Additionally, generators must have this confirmation of their waste at the point of its generation. So how to designate characteristic waste? Once you've decided that a chemical, sludge, product, a spent material, or byproduct either no longer has any use or it must be discarded and you wish to dispose of it, you have the burden to ensure the waste is properly designated. All hazardous and dangerous waste is a solid waste. Therefore, in order to prove you only have a solid waste to manage, you also have to prove it is not a hazardous or dangerous waste by virtue of designation. In the case of characteristic hazardous waste, there are 2 methods that can be used to accomplish this. First, by process knowledge, generator knowledge, and research. And second, by sampling and sending it off for a laboratory analysis. Either or both may be used as long as the information comes from a reliable source. However, one method may be more appropriate than the other, depending on the characteristic you are assessing in your waste. EPA has identified certain properties or characteristics that will result in a solid waste designating as hazardous. This list of specific hazardous characteristics for waste has also been adopted by ecology. Wastes that exhibit these characteristics are given corresponding D-waste codes. It is important to remember that even if a waste meets a listing description, you must still determine if it also exhibits a characteristic. So what are these characteristics? Well, there's ignitability. Does it burn? Corrosivity. Does it have a very high or low pH? Reactivity. Will it explode? Or toxicity. Does it meet any of the toxicity criteria? So for the characteristic of ignitability, there are a number of different types of ignitable waste. One can be a liquid, other than an aqueous solution containing less than 24% alcohol by volume. that has a flash point less than 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius. Flammable materials, or these ignitable wastes, can also be solids or semi-solids that are capable of causing fire through friction, absorption of moisture, spontaneous chemical change, and the resulting fire burns very intensely and is very persistent as well, and it poses a real threat. Compressed gases can also be considered ignitable waste. So your old compressed gas cylinders or old aerosols, most often, can be considered an ignitable waste if they have certain properties, such as if they are flammable in the air, if they're a mixture of 13% or less, they have a flame that can project more than 18 inches from the valve when it's fully open, or if it can flash back to the valve itself, or there's any kind of significant propagation of the flame away from the valve or ignition source if it's open. Some common ignitable wastes are spent solvents, such as acetone, toluene, xylene, or methanol, solvent still bottoms, and some paint wastes are considered ignitable as well. Other types of ignitable wastes are oxidizers, and the regulations consider a material to be an oxidizer if it has the ability to yield oxygen readily to stimulate the combustion of organic matter. Some types of oxidizers are chlorates, permanganates, inorganic peroxides, and some are nitrates as well. This is just kind of a short list of common oxidizers that are out there, but there are quite a few. If you wish to designate your waste to determine if it has the characteristic of being ignitable, you can use generator knowledge as well as laboratory sampling. If you want to use generator knowledge, if you have a product or a chemical you want to dispose of, a very simple way to designate it without sending it off for laboratory analysis is to check the safety data sheet for that material. If the material is considered hazardous due to having a flash point under 140 degrees Fahrenheit, or if it's a known oxidizer, it's going to designate as a D001. And this information can easily be found on the safety data sheet. Example here for methanol, if you look in section 9, you can see that its flash point is clearly lower than 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius. Also, safety data sheets can be very helpful when disposing of spent materials. If the product met the ignitable waste characteristics before its use, it may still have those same properties after it is spent. Likewise, when disposing of a sludge or a byproduct, if you know that waste has properties that are going to match those given in the regulations for ignitable waste, you can designate it as D001. For example, if you had a solid byproduct that will catch on fire through friction, it has that characteristic for ignitability and would designate as D001. For some waste, though, you may need to test to confirm if it will or will not designate as ignitable, or if it should be considered an oxidizer. Designating a waste for flammability can be done in the generator's lab if they have one, or it can be sent to an independent laboratory as well. Testing must conform, though, to the methods that are listed in the regulations. While lab testing can be expensive, it is still less costly than incorrectly managing your waste. And if you have an inconsistent waste stream, which can have varying levels of potentially flammable constituents in it or different amounts of oxidizers, you may need to test your waste for flammability before disposing of it. Now, corrosive wastes. Corrosive wastes are typically some of the easiest to designate because it's simply a matter of pH. Any aqueous solution that has a pH equal to or less than 2 or greater than or equal to 12.5 is going to designate as a corrosive waste and get that D002 waste code. There can also be that same waste code applied to a material that can corrode steel at the rate of 1/4 inch each year at a test temperature of 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And in Washington State, there is a corrosive waste code for solids and semi-solids that, when tested using the paste pH method, can result in a pH, again, equal to or less than 2 or greater than or equal to 12.5. Corrosive liquid wastes have a waste code of D002, Both the federal and state rules use that waste code. Corrosive solids in Washington state have a waste code that's a WSC2. Some common corrosives are cleaning and sterilizing solutions. They often contain bleaches, ammonia, sodium hydroxide, or they're composed of strong acids or bases, and typically even after they're used will have a pH that falls within that range that's going to designate as a corrosive waste. When you're going to dispose of a product or chemical, it's best to check the safety data sheet for that material if you suspect it could be a corrosive. In section 2 and 9 of the safety data sheet, you can find either warnings about it being corrosive, or if it's an aqueous solution, the actual pH will be given. Safety data sheets can also be helpful when disposing of a spent material. If it had a very high or very low pH before its use, it may still have those properties, and you want to make that determination before you dispose of it. So if you're going to dispose of a sludge or spent material or byproduct that you suspect could have a pH that's going to cause a corrosive designation, you need to check that material with a pH meter that has been calibrated. Also, if you have any potentially solid or semi-solid waste that can be tested, you can do a paste test on those with a pH meter as well. If you are unable to make a pH determination due to the lack of a pH meter or the ability to conduct a paste pH test, or perhaps you're simply sending the sample out for a number of different tests and pH will be one of those, a laboratory can certainly take a pH reading for you. If pH is the only hazardous property that you are concerned about with your waste, though, it would be worth investing in a pH meter so that you can take a reading each time to determine if that waste is indeed going to be considered corrosive or not. Now, reactive wastes, these are the very exciting ones because they have quite unstable properties to them. Solid wastes that exhibit the characteristic of reactivity may have one or more of these properties to them. They're going to typically be unstable and readily undergo violent change without detonating. It could react violently with water. It forms potentially explosive mixtures with water. When mixed with water, it generates toxic gases, vapors, or fumes in quantities sufficient to present a danger to human health or the environment. It could be a cyanide or sulfide-bearing waste, which when exposed to pH conditions that are between 2 and 12.5, can generate toxic gases, vapors, or fumes in quantities sufficient to present a danger to human health or the environment. It is capable of detonation or explosive reaction if it is subject to a strong initiating source or if it's heated under confinement or in pressure. It is readily capable of detonation or explosive decomposition or reaction at standard temperatures and pressure. Or it is a forbidden explosive as defined in the DOT regulations, or it could be a division 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, or 1.5 material, again as classified in the DOT regulations. Any material that has any one of those properties would be considered reactive. Reactive wastes are given the waste code D003 under the federal rules as well as under the state rules. Some common reactive wastes in industry are methyl ethyl ketone peroxide, phosphorus sulfide, sulfur phosphide, toluene diisocyanate, and zinc phosphide. Generator knowledge is the primary way reactive waste is designated. When disposing of a product or chemical, you should check the safety data sheet to see if the material is considered reactive. This information can be found in Section 2 and Section 10 of the safety data sheets. If you're using a material safety data sheet for an older product and you can't find a current safety data sheet for it, that information should be in the MSDS somewhere as well. If you're disposing of a sludge, spent material, or byproduct, and you know that it has properties that match those given in the regulations for reactive waste, you must designate it as a D003. For example, a solid byproduct or sludge that will produce enough heat to create smoke or steam in the presence of air or water but designate as D003. These reactive characteristics, while they sound very impactful in the regulations, they doesn't need to be quite as radical as a big explosion to get that D003 regulation. If that material is producing any kind of heat to the point where it could initiate a fire, or it's producing any kind of fumes that if somebody were to breathe them in would make them sick or have an impact on them, again, it's going to have to designate as a D003 waste. Now, there's no prescribed laboratory analysis in the regulations for determining if a material is reactive or not, though laboratory testing can be done to check the reactivity of a material, especially to water. Laboratory testing can also be helpful, though, to identify the specific chemicals that are causing the reaction. But again, if the waste produces heat, it's potentially hazardous fumes or explosive energy in the presence of air, water, or liquids, then it's going to designate as a D003 when disposed of. All right, our last characteristic is toxic or toxicity. A waste exhibits a characteristic of toxicity if, when tested using the toxicity characteristic leaching procedure, also known as TCLP, or it's also called T-clip sometimes, the extract from a representative sample from the waste contains any of the contaminants listed in the toxicity characteristic list in the regulations, at concentrations equal to or greater than the respective values shown in that table. And this is what that table looks like. Hopefully the font's not too small to see it. It's also reprinted on our web page as well. In the white paper section you can find this table. But it's all the different chemicals or constituents that will result in a D code for toxicity and the concentrations that will trigger that waste number. There are 40 of them. A number of them are metals, some are solvents, others are often pesticides or main ingredients in pesticides. Under both the federal and state rules, wastes that are regulated due to the above toxicity characteristics are given the respective waste codes present in Table 1 there. Determining whether waste will designate for the characteristic of toxicity will often have to be done using laboratory analysis. However, generator knowledge can be used in some cases and will often be required to determine if a waste contains a chemical that is on the table of contaminants for toxicity characteristics. If a generator possesses a thorough understanding of the material and or the processes used in the manufacturing of their product, then their knowledge can be used to designate what potentially regulated constituents may be in their waste. Or if you're disposing of a chemical or a product, a review of the safety data sheet will provide you with information about the specific chemicals in the product. This information can be found in Section 3 of the safety data sheet. If one or more of the chemicals are on the table of contaminants for toxicity characteristics, then it should be tested to see if it will designate for those corresponding toxicity characteristics. If your waste has already been analyzed for the toxicity characteristic in the past, you can continue to use this information to continue to designate your waste over time. This is appropriate if your process is not changed and you know what your waste's chemical properties and constituents are. Also, if a generator is using a process that is known to produce a waste that will designate as toxic, this information can also be used to designate the waste. For example, if you're removing paint that's known to contain lead, you don't need to send those paint chips off for sampling or for analysis if it's been well established already that that paint is going to designate as D008. You can simply apply that waste code to that material when you dispose of it. The TCLP test is used for testing toxicity characteristics in waste. And this test measures, again, how likely it is that the toxic chemicals will leach out of the waste under acidic landfill conditions. If the waste exceeds the threshold TCLP levels for the characteristic chemicals, the waste is a hazardous waste. However, the TCLP test is only applicable to constituents and chemicals that are regulated for the characteristic of toxicity. So those are the D004 through D043 contaminants. Other constituents that are regulated due to toxicity as state-only dangerous waste are going to be regulated based on their total concentration of that contaminant and not the TCLP concentration. This is a subtle but very important distinction that you need to keep in mind. Often you will need to test your waste to determine if it's going to designate for the toxicity characteristic. And this is especially true when you have an inconsistent waste stream, which can have varying levels of chemicals. You may need to test for any relevant chemicals in every batch before designating your waste. For waste which will not have a safety data sheet, it is advisable to test for any of the toxic constituents or chemicals that are listed in the safety data sheets for the materials used in the manufacturing process, including any catalysts and for any manufacturing intermediates that might occur during the manufacturing process. Additionally, toxic constituents that could come from machinery or equipment used in the manufacturing process should be included in the analysis. For example, if you're processing materials on stainless steel equipment, testing for chromium. This next section is just a little bit about, in general, laboratory sampling. So if you are doing laboratory sampling as part of your waste designation process, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. That is, waste sampling can be done by the generator or testing service. Either one is perfectly fine. But both EPA and ecology require the same test methods to be used for waste designation. However, they do not strictly regulate the sampling method for collecting the samples. Samples just need to be collected in a manner that's going to provide a sample that's representative of each waste to be tested for or to be analyzed. Once samples are collected, they will need to be sent to an accredited laboratory for analysis. Ecology does not rate laboratories as providing better or worse quality of work, nor does ecology certify or give accreditation to laboratories to perform dangerous waste designation analysis. But regardless of the lab selected to carry out your waste analysis, the lab must use the testing methods that are set forth in the regulations. Once a waste has been designated, the generator must keep records of any test results, waste analysis, or other determinations that were used to designate their waste for at least 5 years from the date that waste was transferred for either to on-site or off-site treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. The test results used to determine the waste must at a minimum contain the following information. So in addition to the analytical result, the source of the sample should be given, the sampling procedure used to collect it should be given, and the date the sample was collected, the name of the laboratory that performed the test, and the testing date and method used. The analytical results should also include the quantitative range or the testing method used for the analysis for any analytes that were not detected in the waste as well. So this covers the basics of designating characteristic hazardous, dangerous waste under the federal and state rules. The next presentation will deal with the designating listed waste. But if you are in need of any waste management training, Cooley Environmental Safety Training has 4 upcoming waste management for Washington State classes or annual RCRA training in the next few months. We are offering the one-day refresher class October 18th and November 15th in Moses Lake. This class is for people who have experience managing dangerous waste and they work for either a large quantity or medium quantity generator, or it's good too for small quantity generators who just want to be aware of what the regulations are and how they might pertain to what they're doing. The class runs from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon and costs $395. We are offering the full 3-day Waste Management for Washington State annual RIPRA training September 19th through the 21st and December 5th through the 7th, also in Moses Lake. And this class is for people who work for large and medium quantity generators who are new to the dangerous waste management process and would like an in-depth training in both the federal and state waste management regulations. This class goes from 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. and costs $995. If you are interested in finding out more about these trainings, please go to our webpage at wasteandsafety.com and click on the training schedule. Or you can email me at angela.stenhouse@wasteandsafety.com. Thank you for your time.